They thought I was just another tech dinosaur from the old guard. 9 years in, out the door with an email and a shrug. But what they didn't know is they fired the one man whose signature kept their billion-dollar platform legal. I didn't just build the system, I owned it. And come Monday, they'd find out what happens when you fire the architect holding the key. My name is Thomas Weller. I'm 42 years old, and until last Friday, I was the Director of Systems Infrastructure at Nexora Systems in Seattle. Or at least, that was my original title before they demoted me to Platform Consultant in one of those corporate reshuffles that smell of impending doom. Nexora isn't a household name, but in the enterprise world, our CRM platform powers the customer relationship management of 7 Fortune 100 companies and hundreds of mid-sized businesses. I didn't just work on that platform, I built it from the ground up. My code, my architecture, my sleepless nights, all of it forms the backbone of a system that generates 85% of the company's revenue. I remember the merger crisis of 2017 like it was yesterday. The database integration was failing. API endpoints were timing out, and the executive team was in full panic mode. I stayed at the office for 64 hours straight, subsisting on vending machine coffee and protein bars. No one noticed when I collapsed on the break room couch at 3 a.m. after the system finally stabilized. The next morning, there was a company-wide email thanking the team for their dedication. Not a word about the man who single-handedly salvaged millions in contracts. That was when I made my decision. While the executives celebrated with champagne in the conference room, I consulted with a lawyer friend about intellectual property rights. Then I quietly registered the core system architecture under my name. Not the code itself, that belonged to Nexora, but the unique infrastructure design that made everything work. The lawyer helped me draft an ironclad licensing agreement that Nexora's legal team signed without reading carefully. They were too busy with the merger paperwork to notice that they'd just given me legal ownership of the system's architectural blueprint. For years, this arrangement worked silently in the background. Nexora had full use of my patented system architecture, and I continued improving it, knowing that my contribution was legally protected. The license renewal was automatic as long as I remained with the company. Then came the new CEO. Ryan Hallbrook swaggered into Nexora with the confidence of a man who'd never faced consequences. 41, with slicked-back hair and custom suits that screamed Silicon Valley disruption, he'd previously run a startup that secured obscene amounts of venture capital before imploding spectacularly. Somehow that failure made him more appealing to our board. He had valuable experience with growth challenges, whatever that meant. From day one, Ryan made it clear that Nexora needed to evolve or die. He filled the halls with meaningless mantras like move fast or move out and disrupt or be disrupted. In meetings, he'd pace around the room, gesturing wildly as he spoke about digital transformation and agile methodologies, without ever demonstrating any understanding of our actual technology. My first one-on-one meeting with him lasted exactly 7 minutes. He glanced at his phone 4 times, asked 0 questions about our infrastructure, and concluded by saying, "We need to streamline our legacy systems. I'm counting on you to be flexible during this transition period." The following week, my job title changed from Director of Systems Infrastructure to Platform Consultant. My team was redistributed to report to a 28-year-old former app developer Ryan had brought with him from his failed startup. My office was relocated from the engineering floor to a converted storage room near facilities management. I knew what was happening. I'd seen this pattern before. Ryan was systematically pushing out the old guard to make room for his people. With each passing week, another veteran employee would disappear, replaced by someone younger, louder, and utterly clueless about our systems but fluent in buzzwords and blind loyalty to Ryan. Still, I kept my head down and did my work. The system needed maintenance, regardless of corporate politics. I documented everything meticulously, knowing that the day would come when they'd try to replace me too. That day was last Friday. At precisely 9:18 a.m., Ryan appeared at my office door. He didn't sit down. He didn't even fully enter the room. Standing in the doorway, he delivered the news with practiced indifference. "Thomas, as you know, Nexora is undergoing significant changes to remain competitive in the market. We're streamlining our operations and need more dynamic team members who can adapt to our evolving business model. Unfortunately, your position has been eliminated, effective immediately." I didn't argue or plead. I simply nodded, packed my personal items into a cardboard box, and walked out. The only company property I took was a USB drive containing photos from last year's team retreat. Nothing confidential, nothing they could accuse me of stealing. Security escorted me to the lobby, where HR handed me a severance package and had me sign a standard separation agreement. The entire process took less than 40 minutes. 9 years of dedication, erased in less than an hour. They thought that was the end of the story. They were wrong. When I got home, I didn't wallow in self-pity or rage at the injustice. Instead, I opened my safe and retrieved 2 critical documents: the original licensing agreement for my system architecture and a notarized copy of the patent certificate. Then I checked the license terms. The Nexora usage license expired automatically upon my termination unless manually renewed by me, and the current license period ended Sunday at 11:59 p.m. In less than 48 hours, Nexora would lose legal access to the very system that powered their entire business. On Saturday afternoon, I sent an email to Nexora's legal department. The subject line read, "Notice of System License Expiration. Immediate legal attention required." I attached the relevant documentation and wrote a brief, factual message explaining that the license for the system architecture would expire the following day and that I, as the legal owner, would need to approve any renewal. I included my phone number and mentioned that I was available for discussion. Then I waited. Sunday passed without response. Either they hadn't read the email or they didn't believe it. Either way, midnight came and went. The license expired. At 8:04 a.m. Monday morning, my phone began buzzing with notifications. First came an automated system alert: Nexora CRM critical failure, multiple services affected. Then text messages from former colleagues. "Systems down completely. What's happening?" By 8:30, my email inbox was flooded. Messages from Nexora's CTO, the head of legal, the VP of operations, and finally, at 9:17 a.m., from Ryan himself. "Thomas, we need to talk immediately about the system issues. Please call me ASAP." I waited 30 minutes before responding. "Ryan, I'm available for a meeting at 11 a.m. today. Please note that we will not be discussing re-employment. We will be discussing licensing terms for the system architecture that I legally own and that Nexora has been using under a now-expired agreement." The meeting was set for Nexora Tower. This time, I didn't enter through the employee entrance. I walked through the main lobby, signed in as a visitor, and was escorted to the executive conference room where Ryan, the CTO, and 2 members of the legal team waited. Ryan's face was flushed with anger, but he attempted a conciliatory tone. "Thomas, there must be some misunderstanding. The system architecture is company property developed during your employment." I placed my documents on the table. "Actually, no. The code written for implementation is company property. The architectural design was registered under my name with full legal protection. Your legal team signed this licensing agreement in 2017, which clearly states that the license expires upon my termination unless renewed by me." The next 2 hours were tense. The legal team reviewed the documents, made phone calls, and finally confirmed what I already knew. I owned the architectural design that made their entire system function. "What do you want?" Ryan finally asked, his voice tight with suppressed rage. I slid a folder across the table. "These are my terms for a new licensing agreement." The terms were straightforward: an annual licensing fee of $1.5 million, quarterly renewal requirements, technical consultation exclusively through me or my designated representatives, mandatory credit, system infrastructure designed and patented by Thomas Weller, displayed on all company materials describing the platform. Ryan tried to negotiate. Of course, he suggested we talk privately to find a solution that wouldn't make this situation more complicated than it needs to be. I declined. "You fired me without reading the fine print. Now you're reading the consequences." By mid-afternoon, the situation had escalated. Nexora's clients were furious about the system outage. The company's stock had dropped 7%. Ryan was increasingly desperate, alternating between threats of legal action and attempts at manipulation. You're destroying what you built, he argued. Is that really what you want? I'm not destroying anything, I replied calmly. I'm simply enforcing my legal rights. The system can be operational again within the hour once we sign a new agreement. At 4 p.m., I received a call from Eleanor Vance, the chairperson of Nexora's board. I had worked with her 5 years earlier, before she joined the board. Thomas, she said, her voice weary but determined. The board is meeting in an emergency session. We'd like you to join us. 30 minutes later, I was presenting my case to the full board of directors. I explained the situation factually, without emotion or accusation. I showed them the documentation and outlined my proposed licensing agreement. When I finished, Eleanor asked, "Why didn't you mention this when you were terminated?" "Would it have mattered?" I countered. "Would Ryan have reconsidered my value to the company if he'd known?" The room fell silent. "No system, no matter how advanced," I continued, "can protect a company from arrogance. What happened today was preventable. It wasn't about code or licenses. It was about respect for the people who built this company and the work they've done." The board asked me to step out while they deliberated. An hour later, Eleanor called me back in. "The board has voted to accept your licensing terms in full," she announced. "Additionally, Ryan Hallbrook has been placed on indefinite administrative leave pending a review of his management decisions." I nodded, maintaining my composure despite the vindication I felt. "We would also like to discuss your return to Nexra in a consulting capacity," Eleanor continued. "Not as an employee, but as a partner." 2 weeks later, I was back at Nexora, not in my old converted storage room, but in a proper office with a nameplate that read, "Thomas Weller, Systems Architecture Consultant." The system was running smoothly again, and I was implementing several internal changes. A mentorship program focused on intellectual property protection for engineers, regular audits of system ownership and licensing, mandatory attribution for all core technical products. Ryan was officially removed as CEO. His replacement, a woman with 20 years of technical experience and a reputation for collaborative leadership, made it a priority to rebuild relationships with the engineering team. One evening, as I was leaving the office, a young intern stopped me in the hallway. "Mr. Weller," she said hesitantly, "people say you saved the system when it crashed, but some of us think you did something more important. You saved the culture." I smiled, genuinely touched by her words. For the first time in years, I felt recognized not for my title or position, but for my actual contribution. They fired me thinking I was just an engineer, but I was the blueprint. And now my name is written in the foundation they tried to bury me under. This isn't just a story about intellectual property or corporate politics. It's about remembering that in a world of disposable talent and replaceable parts, sometimes the most valuable asset is the one person who knows exactly how everything fits together. It's about standing your ground when the world tries to push you out of the picture you helped create. As I settled into my new role at Nexora, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The system I'd built had become my legacy, but the respect I'd earned was my true victory. The Monday after the system crash became known internally as Blueprint Monday. It was referenced in hushed tones by new employees who'd heard the story secondhand. The company's culture gradually shifted from Ryan's "move fast and break things" mentality to a more sustainable approach that valued institutional knowledge and technical craftsmanship. Eleanor often stopped by my office for coffee and technical discussions. During one such visit, she admitted something that confirmed my suspicions about Ryan's hiring. "The board thought we needed someone who could make bold moves," she explained. "We were so focused on growth that we overlooked the foundation. It's a mistake many companies make, believing that innovation means replacing rather than building upon what works." I understood their reasoning, even if I disagreed with it. The tech industry perpetually chases the new and shiny, often discarding proven solutions in favor of trending methodologies. Ryan had been a symptom, not the cause, of this mindset. My new consulting arrangement gave me something I'd never had as an employee: genuine autonomy. I worked 3 days a week at Nexora and spent the other 2 developing my own projects. The licensing fee provided financial security, allowing me to be selective about what I worked on. 6 months after Blueprint Monday, I received an invitation to speak at a tech conference about intellectual property and software development. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of engineers and developers, I shared my story without bitterness or triumph. Just as a cautionary tale about the importance of understanding and protecting one's contributions, the code you write today might power systems for decades. I told them, make sure your name stays attached to your work, not because of ego, but because attribution drives responsibility. When your name is on something, you care about its longevity. After the talk, a line of young engineers waited to speak with me. Many shared similar stories of feeling undervalued or disposable despite their critical contributions. I listened, offered advice where I could, and exchanged contact information with those who seemed particularly passionate about changing the industry's approach to technical talent. Back at Nexora, the ripples of change continued to spread. The new CEO, Dr. Diana Chen, implemented a technical attribution system that recognized key contributors to all major projects. Code repositories included detailed attribution headers. The company website featured profiles of the engineers behind major innovations. Even the marketing changed. Rather than vague promises about cutting-edge technology, Nexora's materials now emphasized the expertise behind their products. Client trust improved as they saw the faces and names of the people responsible for the systems they relied on. 1 year after my termination and subsequent return, I received an email from Ryan. It was brief and surprisingly humble. Thomas, I was wrong about many things, including you. What you built at Nexora deserved recognition, not replacement. I've learned a difficult lesson about valuing substance over style. If you're willing, I'd appreciate the chance to buy you coffee sometime. I considered ignoring it, but eventually replied with a time and place. Our meeting was awkward but necessary, a conversation between two people who had seen different sides of the same broken system. Ryan had found a position at a smaller company, where he claimed to be implementing lessons learned from his Nexora experience. Whether that was true or merely what he told himself, I couldn't say. But there was a subdued quality to him now, a thoughtfulness that hadn't been there before. The board hired me to shake things up, he admitted. I thought that meant replacing the old with the new. I never stopped to understand what was actually working and why. That's the problem with disruption as a philosophy. I replied, sometimes what needs disrupting isn't the technology, but the way we think about the people who create it. We parted with a handshake and no promises of further contact. His lesson had been learned, and I had no desire to be his teacher. As Blueprint Monday faded into company lore, I found myself thinking about legacy, not just the system I'd built, but what would happen after I eventually moved on. The mentorship program I'd established was thriving, with senior engineers sharing not just technical knowledge, but lessons about documentation, attribution, and professional self-advocacy. Among these mentees was Lisa Chen, the intern who had spoken to me that evening after my return. Now a junior engineer, she showed remarkable talent for systems design and a natural curiosity about architecture that reminded me of myself at her age. How did you know the system would work? She asked me once, as we reviewed her proposal for a microservice implementation. When you were building it from scratch, how could you be sure all the pieces would fit together? The question gave me pause. After a moment, I answered honestly, I didn't know. Building complex systems is an act of faith backed by methodology. You design, test, revise, and eventually, you have to trust that the foundation is sound enough to build upon. That's terrifying, she said with a nervous laugh. It's supposed to be, I replied. That fear is what makes you triple-check your work. It's what keeps you documenting everything, planning for failure scenarios, creating recovery paths. The day you stop being a little terrified of what you've built is the day you should stop building. Lisa nodded thoughtfully. Is that why you registered the architecture in your name? Because you knew how fragile it could be? Partly, I admitted. But it was also because I'd seen too many people build incredible things only to have them attributed to the team or the company. Technical work becomes invisible when it's working properly. I wanted mine to remain visible. 2 years after Blueprint Monday, Nexora was thriving. The CRM platform had expanded its market share, and we had launched 2 adjacent products built on the same architectural principles. My name appeared in the credits for each, alongside the teams who had implemented them. Dr. Chen approached me with an interesting proposal. We're considering an open innovation initiative, she explained, sharing certain architectural patterns as open source frameworks while maintaining our proprietary implementations. Would you be interested in leading this effort? The idea intrigued me. By open sourcing selected components of my architecture, we could establish industry standards while maintaining Nexora's competitive advantage through implementation excellence. More importantly, it would create a lasting legacy beyond any single company. I'm interested, I told her, but I'd want to ensure proper attribution mechanisms are built into the open source governance model. She smiled. I expected nothing less. Draft a proposal and we'll discuss it with the board. The Open Architecture Initiative launched 6 months later, with me as its director. We released the first framework specifications under licenses that required attribution while encouraging innovation. The response from the developer community was overwhelmingly positive. Finally, enterprise-grade architectural patterns were available for study and adaptation. Universities began incorporating our frameworks into their computer science curricula. Startups used them to build more robust systems from day one. Even some of our competitors adopted elements of the architecture, acknowledging its source and contributing improvements back to the community. During this period, I received an unexpected message from Eleanor Vance. She was retiring from Nexora's board and wanted to meet for dinner before her departure. Over a meal at a quiet restaurant overlooking the Seattle waterfront, she reflected on the changes of the past few years. When we hired Ryan, we thought we needed disruption. She said, what we actually needed was evolution, building thoughtfully on what was working while changing what wasn't. You taught us that lesson the hard way. Sometimes hard lessons are the only ones that stick, I replied. She nodded, then reached into her bag and handed me an envelope. The board asked me to give you this. Inside was a formal letter acknowledging my contribution to Nexora's success and announcing the establishment of the Weller Innovation Fellowship, an annual program that would provide funding and mentorship to engineers developing new system architectures. We want your legacy to extend beyond just the systems you've built, Eleanor explained. We want it to include the people you inspire to build the next generation of systems. I was genuinely moved. Thank you. This means more than any licensing fee or title. As the Open Architecture Initiative gained momentum, I found myself traveling frequently to speak at conferences and universities. During one such trip to Boston, I received an urgent call from Lisa Chen, who was now leading a development team at Nexora. We found a critical vulnerability in the authentication service, she explained, her voice tense but controlled. It's not in your architecture, it's in a third-party component we integrated last quarter, but it affects every client instance. Have there been any breaches? I asked, already packing my bag to head to the airport. Not that we can detect, but it's only a matter of time. We need a patch deployment strategy that won't disrupt client operations. I'm on my way back, I assured her. Start assembling the response team. 24 hours later, I was back in Seattle working with Lisa and her team to address the vulnerability. The situation reminded me of the merger crisis years earlier, but this time I wasn't alone in the trenches. Lisa displayed remarkable poise under pressure, coordinating the patch development while I handled the deployment strategy. We worked through the night, testing and refining our approach. By morning, we had a solution that could be deployed without system downtime, a patch that would close the vulnerability while maintaining all client connections. As we prepared for deployment, Dr. Chen joined us in the war room. The board has been briefed, she reported. They've authorized emergency resources and approved your plan. How confident are you in this approach? Lisa looked at me, then answered with quiet determination. The architecture is sound. We're building on a solid foundation. This will work. The deployment went flawlessly. By noon, all client instances were secured, with 0 service interruptions. What could have been a catastrophic security breach became instead a testament to the resilience of the system and the team maintaining it. In the aftermath, as the team celebrated their success, I found myself watching from the sidelines with a sense of fulfillment I hadn't expected. This wasn't my victory, It was theirs. Lisa and her team had protected the system not because I was there, but because they understood its architecture and respected its design principles. Later, in my office, Lisa stopped by with 2 cups of coffee. "You know," she said, handing me one, "when I first heard the Blueprint Monday story, I thought it was about revenge. Now I understand it was about recognition." I nodded. There's a fine line between the two. Revenge is about hurting someone who hurt you. Recognition is about restoring balance, making visible what should never have been invisible. "Is that why you stayed?" she asked. "After everything that happened, you could have taken the licensing fee and walked away for good." The question made me reflect on my choices. "I stayed because this is still my blueprint," I admitted. "But more than that, I stayed to ensure that what happened to me wouldn't happen to the next generation of builders. Systems outlive their creators, but the creators deserve to be remembered." 3 years after Blueprint Monday, I made a decision that surprised many at Nexora. I announced my intention to step back from day-to-day operations. The architecture was stable, the open source initiative was thriving, and Lisa Chen was ready to take over as chief architect. Dr. Chen accepted my decision with grace, but insisted on a proper transition. 6 months, she negotiated. Give us that time to ensure everything is documented and transferred smoothly. During those 6 months, I worked closely with Lisa, sharing not just technical knowledge, but the insights that came from years of navigating corporate politics and technological change. We documented everything meticulously, creating what became known internally as the Weller Protocols, a comprehensive guide to the system's architecture and governance. On my final day as a regular consultant, Nexora held a company event in my honor. The atrium of Nexora Tower was filled with engineers, developers, product managers, and executives, people I'd worked with over the years, and many I hadn't. Dr. Chen presented me with a crystal cube containing a 3D etching of the system architecture diagram, my name prominently displayed at its base. "This system will evolve and grow," she said, "but it will always bear the imprint of its original blueprint and the name of the architect who designed it." When it was my turn to speak, I kept it brief. 9 years ago, I joined a company that needed a system. I built that system, line by line, module by module. 4 years ago, I was shown the door, only to discover that I held the key. Today, I'm walking through that door again, not because I have to, but because I choose to. I looked out at the faces watching me, particularly the younger engineers who had only known me as the subject of company lore. Remember this: what you build matters, how you build it matters, and making sure your name stays attached to your work matters most of all. Not for ego, but for legacy. Not for credit, but for continuity. After the event, as the crowd dispersed, Lisa approached me with a small package. "This is from the engineering team," she said. "Something to remember us by." Inside was a custom-made USB drive, sleek and engraved with my name. "It contains a complete snapshot of the system as it exists today," Lisa explained. "Every component, every module, every line of documentation, plus something special. A video from every team member talking about how your architecture influenced their work." I was genuinely touched. "Thank you, this means more than you know." "There's one more thing," Lisa added. "The board has approved my proposal. From now on, every Nexora product will include a digital signature block in its core files. The first line will always read, 'Built on the Weller Blueprint.'" As I left Nexora Tower that evening, I felt a profound sense of closure. The system would continue without my daily involvement, but it would carry my imprint forward. More importantly, it would carry forward the principle that had driven me since Blueprint Monday. Technical contributions deserve recognition, and the people behind them deserve respect. My consulting arrangement with Nexora continued, but on a much reduced schedule. I spent most of my time now on the Weller Innovation Fellowship, mentoring the next generation of system architects. The annual licensing fee, combined with my speaking engagements and advisory roles, provided more than enough financial security. 5 years after Blueprint Monday, I received an invitation that brought my journey full circle. Nexora was celebrating the 10th anniversary of their CRM platform with a special event, and they wanted me to be the keynote speaker. Standing at the podium, looking out at the audience, clients, partners, employees, both current and former, I felt a sense of pride that transcended any lingering resentment about the past. 10 years ago, I began, I started building a system that would eventually become the foundation of what you know as Nexora CRM. Like many architects, I thought my reward would be seeing that system succeed. What I didn't understand then was that systems, no matter how well designed, are ultimately temporary. They evolve, adapt, or get replaced entirely as technology advances. I paused, looking around at the faces watching me intently. What endures isn't the system itself, but the principles behind it. Not the code, but the thinking that generated the code. Not the architecture diagram, but the architectural philosophy. In the front row, I could see Lisa Chen nodding thoughtfully. Beside her sat Dr. Chen and Eleanor Vance, who had returned for the occasion despite her retirement. 10 years ago, I built a system. 5 years ago, I learned that owning your work means more than just doing the work. And today, I understand that the true legacy of any builder isn't what they build, but who they inspire to build next. As I concluded my speech, the audience rose in applause. But the most meaningful response came later. When a young engineer approached me at the reception, "Mr. Weller," he said earnestly, "I studied your architecture in college. It's why I wanted to work at Nexora. The way you designed for both stability and adaptation, it changed how I think about systems." I smiled, remembering my conversation with Lisa years earlier. "The blueprint matters," I told him, "but so does the architect. Never forget that." Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, I found myself alone on the terrace overlooking the Seattle skyline. The lights of the city reflected in the water of Puget Sound, creating patterns that reminded me of system diagrams, nodes and connections, inputs and outputs, all working together in complex harmony. Dr. Chen joined me, offering a glass of champagne. "To 10 years," she toasted. "And to the next 10, I replied. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment before she spoke again. "You know, the board was discussing something interesting yesterday. They're considering a new corporate structure, creating a foundation that would hold the rights to the core architecture in perpetuity, with strict governance around attribution and licensing." "Inspired by recent events?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. She smiled. "Let's just say your Blueprint Monday taught us lessons we don't want future leaders to forget. The foundation would ensure that no one person could ever again hold the keys to the kingdom, but also that no contribution would ever go unrecognized. The proposal was intriguing. A foundation would institutionalize the principles I'd fought for, making them part of Nexora's DNA rather than policies that could be changed with each new leadership team. I'd be interested in helping design that governance model," I offered. "I was hoping you'd say that," Dr. Chen replied. "Eleanor suggested you might be the right person to chair the foundation initially. The symmetry was perfect, from fired employee to foundation chairman, from system architect to architecture guardian. The blueprint had come full circle." As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The system I'd built had evolved beyond my original design, incorporating new technologies and approaches while maintaining its core principles. My name remained attached to it, not just as a credit, but as a philosophy, a reminder that behind every line of code, every module, every interface, there are human beings whose work deserves recognition. The following week, I began drafting the charter for what would become the Nexora Architecture Foundation. Its mission was simple: to ensure that technical contributions were properly attributed, that architectural decisions were documented for future generations, and that the principles of sustainable system design would guide the company's evolution. The Foundation's first act was to establish the Blueprint Archive, a secure repository containing the complete developmental history of Nexora's systems, with detailed attribution for every major component. Its second was to implement the Weller principle across all Nexora products. No system shall be deployed without clear attribution to its architects and builders. 6 years after Blueprint Monday, the foundation was formally established, with me as its chairman and Lisa Chen as chief technical advisor. At the inaugural meeting, Eleanor Vance, now in her 70s but sharp as ever, proposed a toast. To Thomas Weller, she said, raising her glass, who taught us that the most valuable asset in any system isn't the code or the infrastructure or even the architecture. It's the people who understand how it all works together. I accepted the toast with humility, knowing that my story was just one of many in the tech industry, a cautionary tale with a fortunate ending. For every architect who managed to protect their work, there were dozens whose contributions had been erased, forgotten, or attributed to others. The Foundation's work would extend beyond Nexora. We established industry guidelines for technical attribution, sponsored research into intellectual property protection for engineers, and created resources to help technical professionals understand and assert their rights. 7 years after Blueprint Monday, I received a call from a journalist writing a book about the changing relationship between technology companies and the people who build their products. She wanted to interview me about what had become known in industry circles as the Weller case. "Would you do it differently?" she asked during our conversation. "If you could go back to that Friday when you were fired, would you have mentioned the licensing agreement immediately rather than waiting for Monday?" The question made me pause. "No," I said finally. "Sometimes you need to let people experience the consequences of their decisions. If I'd mentioned it immediately, they might have negotiated a quick settlement to make the problem go away. By waiting, I forced a reckoning with the underlying issue, the devaluation of technical contribution." "Do you think companies have learned from your example?" she pressed. "Some have," I acknowledged. "Others are still learning the hard way. But the conversation has changed. Engineers are more aware of their worth, more careful about documentation, more assertive about attribution. That's progress." The book, when published, included a chapter titled The Blueprint Principle, which detailed my story alongside others who had fought similar battles for recognition. It became required reading in several MBA programs and sparked industry discussions about intellectual property rights in collaborative technical environments. 8 years after Blueprint Monday, Nexora underwent another transition. Dr. Chen announced her retirement, and the board initiated a search for her successor. To my surprise, Lisa Chen was among the final candidates, despite being younger than most executives considered for the role. "They want me to interview," she told me during one of our regular mentoring sessions. "What do you think?" "I think you'd be excellent," I replied, honestly. "You understand the technology and the business. More importantly, you understand the culture and what makes it work." She looked uncertain. "Some board members are concerned that I'm too technical, that I lack the financial and strategic experience for a CEO role. Remind them what happened the last time they prioritized those qualities over technical understanding," I suggested with a smile. 2 months later, Lisa Chen was announced as Nexora's new CEO, the first engineer to hold the position in the company's history. At 35, she was also one of the youngest chief executives in the industry. At her first all-hands meeting, she acknowledged the significance of her appointment. 10 years ago, I joined Nexora as an intern and watched as the company learned a difficult lesson about valuing technical expertise. Today, as CEO, I'm committed to ensuring we never forget that lesson. Our strength isn't in our stock price or our market share. It's in the brilliance of the people who build our products and the integrity of the systems they create. Her words resonated with me. They represented the fulfillment of what I had hoped for when I sent that fateful email on Saturday afternoon 8 years earlier. Not just recognition for myself, but a fundamental shift in how technical contribution was valued. 9 years after Blueprint Monday, I made another transition of my own. After serving as chairman of the Nexora Architecture Foundation for 3 years, I decided it was time to step back and let new leadership take over. The foundation was well established, its principles embedded in Nexora's operations and increasingly adopted throughout the industry. At my final board meeting, I nominated Lisa as my successor, creating a direct link between the company's executive leadership and the foundation's governance. The board approved unanimously.